Martin J, a world affairs journalist who's long documented what's been happening in that part of the world. Martin, welcome back to RT International. The Iraqi army unit in question here has been trained by the US since 2015, as I mentioned earlier. What kind of advice and assist training would they have got, do you think?
Yeah, that's really the big question, isn't it? I think looking at what we know so far, it's going to be very difficult to specifically accuse any of those American soldiers for training Iraqi soldiers specifically in the craft of torture. But I think it paints a very poor picture. It puts the Americans under a very poor light in Iraq generally. I mean, what are they doing there exactly? I mean, this sort of euphemistic term advisor, I think the myth has been busted on exactly what those advisors are doing in Iraq. So many questions, but also we should never forget that this is not the first time that torture and extraordinary human rights abuses have been documented by the Americans in Iraq. If we look back to 2003 and the Abu Ghraib prison torture, for example, so this is coming around again. It seems to be something that we should start to get used to in Iraq.
And so given that there has been precedent set so long ago, is it not, if you can't maybe say that the people doing the training and advising are in any way culpable, the US has a responsibility surely to make sure that people affected in Iraq, the people who are holding suspects, operate within the law, no matter who these suspects may be?
Yeah, I think they do have a responsibility, and I think that's part of the responsibility of civil society and media is also driving that same agenda. I mean, at some point, we would hope that the administration and the Pentagon and the State Department would take specific responsibility for these sort of instances. International law is actually more important than most people realize. It's not something that the media tackles very often head on, but we seem to be seeing the auspices of international law slowly being recognized and slowly being played out by the Americans in this region. They've got an awful lot of blood on their hands, and these sort of instances don't, do tend to serve a purpose of throwing a spotlight on human rights atrocities. If you look back in Iraq in 2011, it was Obama who couldn't let American troops stay on in Iraq because of international law, because they weren't given the promises to be exempt from being sued for any of the atrocities that they may well have carried out there. And international law, again, seems to be playing a certain role in some of Trump's decisions in Syria. I think it's quite interesting and notable that just in the last week, President Trump has completely washed his hands of backing scores of extremist groups in Syria. So, there seems to be international law seems to be permeating into the White House and into the Pentagon.
You seem to suggest that it doesn't seem to indicate that Washington's going to change its mind any soon on supporting the Iraqi army in general there. But do you think it's likely that Washington knew that these prisoners were being tortured?
Oh, I don't think we should be naive about that. I think the military knows exactly what it's doing. Nothing's made up at the last moment. There's no creative thought process when you talk about long-term military strategies and working with these these host governments in these regions. But I also think that Human Rights Watch and Amnesty and other such groups also need to take a reality pill, if you like. I mean, the parameters of modern warfare now have shifted so dramatically since 2011. We're dealing with extreme circumstances and extreme war crimes carried out by the people that we're fighting, that there doesn't seem to be a reality check from these human rights groups as well. I mean, to be realistic, these appalling acts of torture are very much a reality of war, and we should accept that in fighting extremists, we're going to see more and more them coming up to the fray. But I think also the Trump administration should take more responsibility. We should have much more accountability from individual officers who are working in those areas.
A bleak assessment, but I fear you're right. For now, Martin J in Beirut, thanks very much for your time.